It was a warm, sunny afternoon in a quiet neighborhood. The streets were lined with trees, and children were playing outside. Samuel, a kind black man in his 30s, was enjoying a peaceful walk. He was a man who always tried to do the right thing, helping others whenever he could. He worked as a community outreach coordinator, helping troubled kids in the local area. Samuel believed in kindness and knew the power of offering a helping hand when needed. As he walked past the park, something caught his eye. A young boy, no older than 8 or 9 years old, was sitting alone on a bench. The boy looked out of place, his small face covered in tears. He had messy hair and dirt on his clothes. His shoulders shook as if he had been crying for a while. Samuel, concerned, stopped and walked closer to the boy. "Hey there," Samuel said gently, trying to sound as calm and friendly as possible. The boy looked up, startled by the voice. His eyes were red, and it was clear he was scared. "Are you all right?" Samuel asked softly. "Where is your mom or dad?" The boy's voice cracked as he spoke. I can't find my dad. I don't know where he went." He looked around nervously, clearly unsure of what to do next. Samuel sat down next to the boy, trying to comfort him without making him feel scared. "It's okay, buddy. I'm sure we can find your dad. Do you remember where you saw him last?" The boy wiped his eyes with the sleeve of his shirt. "He said he'd be right back." The boy replied, his voice trembling. "But I've been waiting for a long time, and he's still not here." Samuel looked around, scanning the park for any sign of the boy's father. There was no one in sight. He knew that many children played in the park, but this situation felt different. The boy's fear was real. "Don't worry," Samuel said, offering a reassuring smile. "I'll help you find him. Let's start by walking around the park. Maybe he's just nearby." The boy nodded, still looking uncertain. Samuel stood up and offered his hand. "Come on, let's walk together, and we'll find him." The boy hesitated but then took Samuel's hand. They began walking slowly, looking for any sign of the boy's father. As they walked, Samuel tried to keep the conversation light. "What's your name, by the way?" he asked with a smile. "I'm Eli," the boy replied softly. "That's a nice name, Eli," Samuel said. "How long have you been in the neighborhood?" "My family just moved here a few weeks ago," Eli said. "I don't know anyone here yet." "Don't worry, Eli. I'm sure you'll meet some great friends soon," Samuel reassured him. As they walked through the park, Samuel made sure to keep Eli calm. He knew that many kids felt scared in new places, especially when they were lost. He was determined to help the boy feel safe and to find his dad. But as they walked further down the street, Samuel couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't quite right. He had no idea that this small act of kindness would soon spiral into a situation much bigger than he had imagined. As Samuel and Eli walked through the park, they passed by families and other children playing on the swings and running around. The sound of laughter filled the air, but Eli remained quiet, his eyes still scanning the area for any sign of his father. Samuel could see the worry in the boy's eyes and tried his best to keep his calm. They reached the edge of the park, where a row of houses lined the street. Samuel stopped for a moment and knelt down to Eli's level. "All right, Eli, let's take a look around here. Maybe your dad just went to get something or speak to someone," Samuel suggested. Eli nodded, but his face showed no sign of relief. The fear was still there, and Samuel knew that the boy was probably thinking the worst. Samuel gave him a reassuring smile. "We'll find him. Don't worry." They continued walking along the sidewalk, glancing at the houses and looking for anyone who might know Eli's father. But after a few minutes, Samuel noticed something strange. He saw a man standing by the front porch of one of the houses. The man was staring at them, his eyes narrowed as if he were watching them closely. Samuel didn't think much of it at first, but the man's stare seemed a little too intense. As they continued walking, the man stepped off his porch and quickly approached them. "Hey, what are you doing with my son?" The man asked loudly, his voice full of anger and suspicion. Samuel's heart skipped a beat. He glanced at Eli, who looked terrified. "Excuse me?" Samuel asked, trying to keep his voice calm. "Your son. I'm just helping him find his father. He's lost, and we're looking for his dad." The man's expression darkened. "You're the one who's going to get us in trouble. Get your hands off my son," he shouted. Samuel's calm demeanor began to slip, and he stood up straight, holding his hands in front of him to show he wasn't a threat. "I'm not touching him, sir. I'm just helping him. He was crying because he couldn't find his dad. I'm trying to help him feel safe," Samuel explained. He tried to remain patient, but the man was clearly upset. "I know what you're trying to do. You're just trying to steal him," the man yelled. At that moment, Samuel's stomach twisted with unease. This wasn't just a misunderstanding anymore. The man's tone was accusing and filled with anger. Before Samuel could respond, the man pulled out his phone and began dialing a number. "I'm calling the cops. You can't just take my kid," he yelled, backing away from them. Samuel stood frozen, not knowing what to do. His heart raced as he glanced at Eli, who looked confused and frightened. The man stepped back, still on the phone, shouting into it. "There's a guy here, trying to kidnap my son. He's with a black man, and they're walking down the street together. You need to send someone right away." The words sent a chill down Samuel's spine. How had things escalated this quickly? Samuel felt a deep sense of frustration. He hadn't done anything wrong. He was simply trying to help a child who had lost his father, but now the situation was taking a turn he couldn't have predicted. The tension was rising, and Samuel knew he had to act fast to avoid further trouble. Eli, meanwhile, was looking at the ground, his small body trembling. Samuel bent down again and whispered to him, "It's okay, Eli. We're going to get through this. You're safe with me, all right?" But as Samuel looked back at the man, he knew that this was only the beginning of a much larger confrontation. The man was calling the cops, and Samuel feared what would happen next. The sound of sirens grew louder in the distance, and Samuel's heart began to pound. He had never been in a situation like this before. He didn't know if the police would believe him, or if the situation would turn into something far worse. He looked at Eli, who was still trembling, his wide eyes fixed on the ground. Samuel crouched down beside him. "Eli, stay calm," Samuel said, trying to reassure him. "The police are here to help, okay? We're just going to explain everything, and it'll be fine." Eli barely nodded, still too frightened to speak. Samuel took a deep breath, trying to steady his nerves as he saw the flashing lights of 2 police cars pulling up to the curb. The officers stepped out of their vehicles quickly, their eyes scanning the area before they approached Samuel and the man. One officer, a tall man with short blonde hair, walked directly toward Samuel. His stern face softened when he saw Eli, but the tension in his voice was clear. "What's going on here?" he asked, his eyes flicking between Samuel and the angry father. "This child is lost," Samuel began, trying to explain calmly. "I found him crying in the park. I was just trying to help him find his father. We were walking together, looking for his dad, but then this man came up to us, yelling and accusing me of something I didn't do." The officer turned to the father, who was still standing a few feet away, visibly upset. "Sir, why are you so upset?" the officer asked. The man, still red-faced and angry, pointed a shaking finger at Samuel. "He's trying to kidnap my son. I saw them together, and now he's saying he's helping him. He's lying." Samuel could feel the officer's eyes on him, but he stayed calm. He knew the truth, but he also knew that he had to be careful with his words. He could sense the suspicion in the air, but he didn't want to make the situation worse. The other officer, a woman, stood beside the first officer, her hand resting on the radio at her side. "This is a misunderstanding," Samuel said firmly. "I'm just trying to help. Please, check with the boy. He's only a kid. His name is Eli. He was lost and scared, and I was only walking with him to make sure he's okay." The officer who had been speaking to the father nodded, his face unreadable. "All right, let's get things straightened out. Sir, can you come over here?" He motioned to the man. The father stepped forward, his angry expression not softening. As the officer turned to talk to him, the second officer approached Samuel. "Are you okay?" she asked, her voice softer now, though still serious. "I'm fine," Samuel said, though his heart was still racing. "I just want to make sure this boy gets back to his father." "I understand. We'll sort this out," she said, giving him a reassuring look. Just then, the first officer turned back toward them. "We've checked the child's story. His father is nearby and was looking for him. We're going to get him back home safely." Relief washed over Samuel, but it was clear that the tension wasn't over yet. The father was still furious, but the situation was beginning to diffuse. "I don't know what's going on in your head, but this isn't how you handle things," the officer said to the man. "You could have asked for help without jumping to conclusions. We're going to make sure everything's cleared up. But this is over." The father's anger didn't disappear right away, but Samuel could see that the officer's calm presence was starting to diffuse the situation. As the officer turned to him, Samuel gave a small nod, feeling a bit more at ease. Eli was still quiet, but he looked up at Samuel, his fear starting to fade away. "This isn't the way things should have gone," Samuel said quietly, his hand on Eli's shoulder. "But you're safe now, Eli. You're going to be okay." The officer, noticing the exchange, gave a small nod of understanding and walked toward the other officer, leaving Samuel and Eli standing by the sidewalk, both a little shaken but ready to see this story come to its end. The situation seemed to calm down as the officer continued to speak with Eli's father. Samuel stayed close to Eli, offering him silent comfort as the boy's shoulders slowly relaxed. The tension in the air had started to dissipate, but there was still a lingering unease. Eli clutched Samuel's hand tighter, his small fingers wrapped around the man's fingers as if he was holding onto the only thing that felt safe. Samuel couldn't help but feel the weight of the boy's trust. He knew this wasn't just about a misunderstanding anymore. It was about a young boy, alone and scared, and a kind act that had been misjudged. The father's voice grew quieter as the officers spoke to him, and Samuel couldn't help but overhear bits of the conversation. "I'm sorry. I just saw them together, and I wasn't sure," the father stammered. The officer's voice was calm, but firm. "It's understandable to be concerned, sir, but jumping to conclusions without knowing the facts can cause a lot of problems." He paused for a moment, his tone softening. "What matters now is that your son is safe, and you're going to be reunited." Samuel took a deep breath, trying to stay composed as he looked down at Eli, who was finally starting to relax. Eli's wide eyes had softened, though he still looked unsure of what was going to happen next. Samuel was relieved that he hadn't been pulled into something he couldn't explain. It was a misunderstanding, but it could have been so much worse. As the father approached them, his expression had changed. Gone was the rage, replaced by a more subdued look. He glanced at Samuel with a mix of guilt and confusion. "I'm sorry," the father said, his voice quieter. "I didn't know what to think. I should have just asked you what was going on." Samuel smiled gently and gave him a reassuring nod. "It's okay. You were just worried about your son. I understand." The father paused for a moment, looking at Eli. I never expected someone to help like that," he admitted. "I've never seen you around here before, but you were kind to my boy when he needed it most." His words seemed sincere, though there was still hesitation in his voice. Samuel watched as the father finally approached Eli, kneeling down to his level. "I'm sorry, son," the father whispered, his voice full of regret. "I wasn't thinking clearly. Thank you for helping him." Eli looked up at his father, still quiet but no longer as frightened. "It's okay, Dad," he whispered back. He reached out, taking his father's hand, and for the first time in what felt like forever, Samuel saw the boy's face soften, The officer who had been standing nearby nodded to Samuel, offering him a respectful smile. "Thank you for your patience and cooperation. Sir, you did the right thing." Then, turning to the father, he added, "Let's make sure we get you home safely." Samuel watched as the father and son, now reunited, walked toward the officer's patrol car. The situation, which had felt so tense just moments ago, was finally resolved. The police officers gave Samuel a friendly nod before getting into their cars and driving away. As the dust settled and the street grew quieter, Samuel stood there with Eli, still holding his hand. He watched as the boy's shoulders finally relaxed, the weight of fear lifted off him. Eli turned his gaze to Samuel, his voice small but full of gratitude. "Thank you for helping me," he said. Samuel smiled warmly. "You don't have to thank me, Eli. It was the right thing to do. You were scared, and I'm glad I could help." Eli nodded, the smallest of smiles appearing on his face. For a moment, it seemed like everything had come back to normal. But Samuel knew this day, this moment, would stay with both of them for a long time to come. The next few days passed by slowly for Samuel. The weight of what had happened that day still lingered in his mind, though the anxiety had mostly worn off. He had done what he felt was right, helping a boy who needed him. But the situation had made him realize how complex and difficult life could be for people who weren't always given the benefit of the doubt. After the encounter with the officers, Samuel made sure to keep a low profile, not wanting to draw any attention to himself. He had expected to hear from the father again, but days went by, and he heard nothing. He began to wonder if the father would think differently of him or hold some resentment. One afternoon, as Samuel was walking down the street, he saw the boy, Eli, playing with other children in a small park. The laughter of the children was a welcome sound, and for a brief moment, Samuel felt his worries ease. He was about to continue on his walk when Eli ran up to him, his face lighting up. "Mr. Samuel," Eli called, his smile wide and sincere. "I wanted to thank you again for helping me that day." Samuel paused, looking down at the boy. "Eli, you don't need to thank me. I was just doing what anyone would do." But Eli shook his head, his brown eyes serious. "No, not everyone would help like you did. My dad's been telling me a lot about how people don't always treat others the same. You helped me even though you didn't know me." Samuel smiled, kneeling down to Eli's level. "Your dad's right," he said softly. "Some people may not always treat others kindly, but that doesn't mean we can't do what's right." Eli nodded, his expression thoughtful. "Dad said you were brave, standing up for me. He said that not all heroes wear capes." That made Samuel chuckle. "I wouldn't exactly call myself a hero. I just tried to help when you needed it." "I think you are, though," Eli said firmly. "A hero doesn't always need to wear a cape." The words touched Samuel more than he expected. He knew he wasn't looking for praise or attention, but hearing them from Eli, a young boy who had been through so much, made him realize that his simple act of kindness had meant more than he had thought. At that moment, the boy's father, the one who had been so quick to judge Samuel, approached from a distance. His eyes met Samuel's, and for a moment, there was a sense of hesitation between them. The last time they had spoken, it had been full of tension. But this time, the father's face softened. "I just wanted to apologize," he said, looking at Samuel with sincerity. "What happened that day? I was wrong to judge you so quickly. I should have seen that you were just trying to help." Samuel nodded, appreciating the apology. "It's okay. I understand. It's easy to get scared when things don't make sense, but we learned from those moments." The father seemed relieved, his shoulders relaxing. "You've got a good heart," he said. "Thank you for being there for Eli." Eli looked up at his father, then back at Samuel. "My dad says we should be kind to everyone, even when it's hard," he said. "You showed me what that really means." The exchange was simple, but it meant the world to Samuel. In that moment, He understood that even in the most unexpected situations, kindness could break down barriers. The bond between him, Eli, and his father had strengthened, and Samuel felt hopeful for the future. The journey had started with an act of kindness, and it was clear now that it was creating a ripple effect of understanding and growth. The days that followed brought a sense of calm to Samuel's life. Though he had always tried to live by a set of values, he now understood more than ever how important it was to be kind and patient with others, no matter what. The encounter with Eli's father had been difficult, but it opened the door to something much bigger, a chance for growth and change, not just for him, but for the people around him as well. Eli's father, Marcus, had reached out to Samuel a few more times over the next couple of weeks. Each conversation felt more natural than the last, as though they were slowly moving past the tension that had once divided them. The two men had been able to talk about their experiences and share perspectives on what it was like living in a world where sometimes people are judged based on what they look like or where they come from. One afternoon, Samuel was sitting on his front porch when he saw Marcus walking toward his house. This time, there was no hesitation. Samuel stood up and waved, smiling. Marcus grinned back, a look of warmth in his eyes. "Hey, Samuel," Marcus said, shaking his hand firmly. "I've been thinking a lot about what happened. I know it was a strange situation, but I think it's made me see things differently." Samuel nodded, always glad for a genuine conversation. "I get it. I think sometimes we react out of fear. It's easy to do, but we have to remember that fear doesn't always give us the full picture." "You're right," Marcus agreed, sitting down next to him. "I was so quick to judge you based on what I saw, but that's not the whole story. You're a good person, and what you did for Eli, well, it was something I could never forget." Samuel looked at Marcus with a thoughtful expression. It's easy to jump to conclusions, especially when we don't understand each other. But the best thing we can do is try to listen, even when it's hard. For a while, they sat in silence, the weight of their words hanging in the air. It wasn't just about the incident that had happened, but about everything that had come after. Samuel had made a decision long ago to try to do good by others, but that moment had shown him just how deep the change went. It wasn't just about one act of kindness. It was about creating a ripple, one that could reach farther than he had imagined. "I'm glad we could talk," Marcus finally said. "I don't think I'd fully realized how much we have to learn from each other. I just want Eli to grow up knowing that people can be kind and fair, no matter what." Samuel smiled, feeling a deep sense of pride. "Eli's lucky to have you as a father, and I'm glad to see that things are changing for the better." Just as they were talking, Eli came running over from the yard, his usual smile lighting up his face. "Are we going to the park today, Dad?" Marcus chuckled and ruffled his son's hair. "Of course, buddy. We're going to the park, and we're going to make sure you're not running too fast for me to catch up this time." Eli turned to Samuel and gave him a big hug. "Thanks for being so nice to me," he said, his words simple but full of meaning. "I hope you can come to the park with us sometime." Samuel smiled warmly, feeling his heart swell. "I'd love to, Eli. Maybe next time we can play some soccer together, huh?" As they walked to the park together, Samuel couldn't help but feel a sense of hope. This journey, which had begun with one small act of kindness, had led to something bigger. It had led to new friendships, new understanding, and a future where compassion could break down the walls of judgment. And Samuel knew that, no matter what happened next, they were all better for it. As the weeks turned into months, Samuel and Marcus's relationship continued to grow stronger. What had started as an uncomfortable and tense encounter had blossomed into a real friendship, one based on understanding, patience, and a shared desire to see things change for the better. Both men learned a great deal about each other, and more importantly, they learned about themselves. Eli, too, was thriving in this new environment. With his father's support and Samuel's guidance, he became more confident, more comfortable in his own skin. The boy, who had once been unsure of his place in the world, now felt like he was a part of something. Whether it was at school, in the neighborhood, or at the community center where Samuel worked, Eli began to shine. One Saturday afternoon, Samuel invited Marcus and Eli to a local park for a family picnic. It was a warm, sunny day, perfect for spending time outdoors. As Samuel set up the picnic blanket and opened the cooler with sandwiches and drinks, he smiled to himself. He was glad to see how much things had changed. The bond between him, Marcus, and Eli had deepened into something truly special. Eli ran around the park with other kids, playing tag and laughing. Samuel and Marcus sat together, talking about their lives and the lessons they had learned. The conversation was easy now, without the awkwardness that had once filled the air. "You know," Marcus began, "I've been thinking a lot about everything that happened. It wasn't just about that day. It's made me realize how much I've been holding on to, thinking I had all the answers. But meeting you, Samuel, made me see that there's more to life than what I knew." Samuel nodded, grateful for Marcus's words. "We all have things we need to learn. I think what matters is that we're open to it, open to change, open to understanding. It's never easy, but it's worth it." "Yeah," Marcus agreed. "It's all about being open. I used to think I knew what was best. But when I saw how you treated Eli that day, I realized there's so much more to kindness than what I had been showing." Samuel smiled, understanding where Marcus was coming from. It's not about being perfect. It's about trying to make a difference, even in the smallest ways. Sometimes that's all it takes. As they watched Eli playing, running around with his new friends, Marcus turned to Samuel. "You know, I'm glad Eli has you in his life. He looks up to you. You've taught him a lot already, and it's only been a short time. I'm just here to help him, like I would any other kid," Samuel replied. "But I'm lucky to be part of his life. He's taught me just as much. Sometimes kids know things we don't." The afternoon passed quickly, filled with laughter, good food, and easy conversation. By the time the sun began to set, the three of them were sitting together on the picnic blanket, talking about the future. "I'm proud of you, Eli," Samuel said, looking at the boy. "You've come a long way." Eli grinned. "Thanks, Mr. Samuel. I'm happy too." The bond between the three of them had become unbreakable. They weren't just neighbors or strangers who had crossed paths for a brief moment in time. They were family, bound by kindness, understanding, and shared experiences. Samuel knew that no matter what the future held, they would continue to support each other and face challenges together. As the day came to a close, Marcus looked at Samuel and said, "You know, I was wrong that day. I didn't see the full picture, but now I understand. I'm grateful for everything you've done for Eli." Samuel smiled, feeling the sense of peace. "We're in this together, Marcus. Always." And with that, the three of them packed up their picnic and walked home, ready for the next chapter in their lives. Together, they knew that they could face anything as long as they kept learning, growing, and supporting each other.